All right. I guess we can get started. Are we live on YouTube yet?
We are live on YouTube.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. So welcome to the 12th Code of Call. I just thought we'd sort of start because we've been changing the format a bit sometimes. I just would want to go around and let everyone sort of speak to mind about sort of what they think the purpose of this meeting is, and just make sure we're on the same page so it's as useful as possible for as many people as possible. So maybe we can start. Eric, what's sort of your take on what you would rather talk about and not talk about during these calls? And then we can go around.
Personally, what I like about these calls is that it helps me keep up to date with what the other teams are doing now that there is a bit more separation between the different areas of development. And yeah, that's I don't know what I expect more or less from it. It's already valuable enough for me. I guess on my side, I'm looking into participating more because so far I have not contributed much to these updates. And yeah, that's all for me.
Right, cool. Julian? I guess maybe, yeah, I don't know. Or if someone has something specific they want to say, like, yeah, just speak up, especially if you don't usually speak up, that's extra useful.
Yeah, so I will say something as I was supposed to talk. So yeah, I feel like there is kind of a redundancy between the various calls we have, and channels. So I guess what I expect from this call is to have maybe a very high level understanding of what every swarms is working on, but not so interested in details in general, I guess. And yeah, eventually, if there is some decision to be made across engineering, like things related to pull requests or workflow in general, that type of things. Because otherwise, we already have like team calls, so we can already discuss technical details per team. So yeah, just in general, if we could have like shorter call, I think it would make sense.
All right, cool. I guess we're probably too many to go for everyone, but does someone else have something? Do people generally agree that, like, do we want to have Swarm updates in these calls or not? Or do people have other views on what these calls should be about?
I think one area where these calls might be good for is for announcements, like if something changes, could be something like related to continuous integration or some tooling aspect that everyone needs to be aware of. We might discuss this synchronously, both before taking the decision and after, to elucidate some aspects. It's nice to have this synchronous aspect, as long as people are, they voice their opinions and concerns.
Yeah, I mean, from my side, I completely agree. Like, if there's something that's sort of application wide or something that needs to be discussed or made aware of by all teams, I mean, this is a great forum for it. As opposed to, aside from that, sort of like any ways that we can improve like our workflows or what we know is working well, as well as just keeping everybody up to date and on the high level is pretty valuable.
Cool. Does anyone disagree that we should have like high-level Swarm updates in these calls?
I disagree if it's covered in the recent town hall or in some other forum, unless it's absolutely necessary for other people to know.
Yeah, I tend to agree.
Yeah.
I think it's too repetitive. There's Swarm update information in a lot of different places. But again, if it's something that's like application wide or has an effect on other teams, then it could be important to bring up.
All right, cool. Any other thoughts? Another question, I guess, is to what extent do people think the focus of this call should be purely technical versus maybe discussing things that might be slightly tangential? So one example would be things like fee structure and these types of things, which might touch more on, I don't know, like more product business design kind of things. Do people have any thoughts on that?
I guess it's more of a question. If we don't discuss those things on this call, where would we have a discussion about them? Because like the general town halls are not really like not really discussions. They're just sort of an update. So if we don't discuss those things here, where would we discuss them?
Yeah, I agree. And also one more question is that we don't have like fully don't have a lot of things to discuss sometimes. So I don't know if we need to filter it like that early, because it's not like that each dev call is like 4 hours and we can finish it. So I just maybe everything that seems more or less sensible and related to these kind of discussions, I don't know, company-wide, it's okay to be here, as long as the timing is okay.
I really enjoyed, was it the previous dev call where we thought we had too many agenda items, but like we all kind of compiled them together and then voted on them, and then we just went through them all. I thought that worked really well, unless anyone disagreed or thinks it could be improved upon.
Yeah, I mean, if anything, we have too little to discuss sometimes. It's not too much. So, but the previous one was good, yes.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
All right, cool. So I guess unless there's any other thoughts, we can move on with the actual meeting. And then, yeah, I mean, if people have any thoughts on ways these calls can be improved or be more effective, then please don't hesitate to raise it. Then we can talk about it. But it's, yeah. Does anyone have something else you want to add before we get started? All right, cool. So the first item is around better pull requests. And the context here is that we had this discussion a few times, but we tend to have very long-lived pull requests, and it's kind of a problem because it leads to lots of rebasing and you don't have a lot of integration and so on. And previously we decided we want to use sort of feature flags a lot more liberally, which means you can hide features and only sort of have one pull request where you actually toggle on screens or whatever. But it seems like we have fallen out of practice with that. So I guess, yeah, any thoughts on that or any additional comments?
I do. So I think I have to say, I don't think we have fallen out of that. It's just like sometimes the rule is if it touches like existing functionalities, then essentially like it cannot skip QA and we cannot use feature flags. I mean, we can use obviously, but if you are fixing a bug, you want it to go live straight away. You don't want to keep the bug and put and so I feel like the subset of features that we can actually use feature flags it's a bit limited currently. And so I think that's one of the problems. And also another issue is that when there is a release, PRs accumulates very much for good reasons, of course, because the testers are, busy testing the release. But I think that is actually the main problem, that if there is a release, all hands on deck, everyone is testing. You can see now how many PRs there are in the testing queue. And that leads inevitably to people adding code to existing PRs rather than creating new ones, because it's just so difficult otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah, and another thing related to big PR is that then it really becomes very hard to make a good review of the pull request. If I have a pull request with like 35 files changed, it will be really hard to just invest time and energy to make sure I provide good feedback. So eventually, I guess most people, they just quickly glance on the pull request and then accept it, or just make like some random useless comment. So I think that's kind of the main issue here. So in my opinion, it would almost make sense to prevent pull requests bigger than 10 files or something. Because the main issue then is otherwise it's really easy to come up with an excuse to just create a big pull request. So it's kind of a vicious cycle here.
Yeah. I think we should be able to ask ourselves regularly, does this PR need to be this big, or can I break it into smaller pull requests? I think there's a lot to be said. If all your colleagues know that your pull requests are small, they'll be more keen on quickly responding to a pull request. So if we knew that all those pull requests on the queue are small, I think things would be much more fluid.
But this relies on the assumption that these PRs are merged in a timely fashion. If I split my PR into 7 PRs and each PR takes 3 days to get into the code base, then no one will ever do that, because it's just like so long rather than waiting for days.
Yes, certainly there is that problem, but maybe at that point we could try to identify where the bottleneck is and see if we can do anything about it. Whether it's testing or whether it's continuous integration or just people not responding.
I think we know it's manual QA.
Just a thing. I agree with what you said about small PRs. I think that it's also maybe a question of how you code as well, because maybe the easiest thing to do is to change code. Like you have some function and then you may want this different argument or whatever, or you want to change the logic of it. But there's a different style of coding where you don't remove existing code necessarily, at least not initially. Instead, you create new code and then you can isolate the behavior. Usually you can isolate it. Even if it's like a long multi-screen flow, you can still create new screens and you can add comments and saying these should be gone. And then you can just have a simple flag in one or maybe a few places. And then it doesn't matter if there's a release, as long as the thing compiles, it's not actually being called anywhere. And I feel like we're not being creative enough in terms of adding new code and then just isolating, this is exactly how it's going to be called. And then having a small PR that just toggles the flag or changes stuff. And then you can always remove code after the fact once you know the new path works perfectly. I don't know if people have any thoughts on that.
I sort of like, I don't fully agree with you. Like, I understand what you're saying and I know that that's possible. And, I think any of us have done that to some extent. And I don't think this comes as a new, we discussed this, but the fact that we keep having certain problems, is also because the system we have in place does not help you with that. I think there are some underlying issues that we are not addressing. Again, now we're getting to where automated tests are much more reliable. I am for some PRs, regardless whether they should skip QA, regardless whether they have live things or no, like they have an impact. For example, I fixed the bug with the mail servers that was in Nightly now. It touches it has some impact on the code base, of course. So you should go for manual QA, but it's a super small fix, and I don't think it should go through manual QA. So I think we should relax those rules, because certain PRs should just go through even without having manual QA, because we make the judgment call that the impact is so small, and it's more useful to have it inside and outside. Bugs get through. I mean, like we've seen, like nightlies have loads of bugs. So not because of the manual QA is doing a bad job, quite the contrary, but bugs do get through. So I think we were being too cautious on that side.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Andrea here because like if we want small PRs, that means we'll have more PRs. That means if we'll have manual QA on each PR, it will just take forever. That's also one of the reasons why you want a bigger PR, because, well, you want all the feature to be tested like once, and yeah, instead of like 5 or 6 times. So it's yeah. So maybe we should relax the rules a little bit on the PRs.
Yeah, I guess those two things go hand in hand. If they are smaller, it becomes easier to understand and to reason about them and see if it makes sense to do manual QA or not.
Yeah, we should probably relax it only on the smaller PRs, obviously. Like if it's just one line change, that's regression scope is pretty obvious. And especially if it's already covered. So essentially, like imagine if you change in something that will, if you do it wrongly, breaks all the chat functionality, then I'm pretty sure our auto test will find this out. So there's
so I agree with sort of, I think we've had this discussion a few times, and the conclusion has been that we need automated tests to be baseline reliable and they should block. And once that's done, then we can sort of relax this cycle. Now I believe the automated tests are in that state. So I guess what's stopping us from doing that now? Being more quick. So I mean, the goal would be if you have a small PR, like you should be able to, as soon as the automated tests have run and people make a judgment call and a code review, then you should be able to merge it. So you have this quick feedback cycle. I'm not sure is there anything blocking there? I don't know. Does QA have some perspective here?
There is one problem from having a lot of small PRs. It's like when a PR makes some changes into the product, I need to update those tests. And right now I have a queue of that PRs, like 3 PRs in queue, because I just can't update all of them. It's really hard to update big PRs, like, for example, like Wallet redesign PR, where you need to update like 100 tests. But it should be easy to update small PRs. So from auto test perspective, I agree to have like smaller PRs. Makes sense.
Yeah, and for some of the smaller PRs, like if they don't touch UIs, maybe you won't have to like update anything, because yeah, if it's a bug fix.
But maybe I'm naive or something. But like talking about this specific wallet thing, which is a good example of a big PR. Sorry to call this out specifically, but to me that's an example of something where you could leave the thing as it is and then design the new screens and literally have a flag that's a dev flag, and then all this partial progress would already be in the repo, and then it would just have a tiny PR where you would actually activate it by default, or where you would remove the old screens, and that's where sort of this additional work would be. You wouldn't have this 40 file diff and this like huge update job. Is there a reason we are not doing it that way? In this specific example, and I think it generalizes to lots of other PRs.
Can you repeat that part, Oscar?
No, I mean, like if we have a PR that changes a lot of complex UI flows, like why are we changing the flows as opposed to adding new flows and then toggling being off by default for using these new flows? And then you would gradually get the changes into the code base, and you would decouple the sort of automated testing, and you would just have one tiny PR that would toggle the flag on by default, and that would sort of, that's where the QA work would be, and so on.
But I guess actually it's mostly related to mindset and just changing the way we work. But actually, yeah, it makes sense.
So I have some thoughts on this, because on the Embark team, Tyler, and so on, we really try to keep as few PRs open as possible. Well, one thing I personally really hate is work in progress PRs, and the reason is because typically those type of PRs are done to give a sort of illusion of work, and they just tend to hang around. They need constant maintenance. Only exception we make, so we actually have a rule that we don't allow work in progress PRs. The only exception is for things like bounties and things like that. And even those, you can see that people would do work in progress PR with something, I don't know, like copy pasted from Stack Overflow, just to give illusion of illusion of work, as I call it. So if there's a PR open, it should be with the intention of merging, ideally in the same day or in a few days, depending on what the PR is. And the longer PR is open, the worse it is. Like if a PR is open for a few months, it becomes really hard to maintain. You need to constantly rebase, constantly keep up with changes, and it becomes more likely that it's not even going to be merged. So the PR is very old. You might as well just close it, and the person then should open it when they think they're actually ready to be merged. The other things in terms of the code reviews, it's important also that the code reviewer be reasonable. And for example, that sometimes some code reviewers have a tendency to ask for changes that are not related to the PR itself. That should not happen. If someone does a PR, for example, for a feature, the PR should be related only to that feature, and the reviewer shouldn't ask, well, since you touched this file, you might as well refactor this whole thing. That shouldn't happen. If there's unrelated changes, that should just be done in a different PR. Or if an idea or feature or even a new bug is found within the context of that PR, that should also be done. I don't mean a bug introduced by the PR, but just a bug that happened to be found because of that work. That should also be done in a different PR. So it's important to keep things as isolated as possible and to basically just reduce that mental workload, because the more PRs there are, the worse it becomes. So I mean, ideally the workflow is really by the end of the iteration, whatever that iteration is, that to aim for most PRs at least to be merged. Sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes there's like big changes in the code base and things get delayed, and that's fine. But having PR, in my opinion, having PRs more than 2 weeks is really, you might as well close them. It just becomes a maintenance nightmare. If there's a PR open that I have no intention to merge in the same day, then it's just not really ready to be reviewed in the first place.
Definitely agree. And just out of curiosity, like have a look at Status React and look at the PRs that are open, that have been open a long time, and compare it to the Embark PRs. The oldest Embark PR is 11 days old. They have 9 open, and they are more active than Status React. So I don't see what's so special about Status React that we couldn't do the same thing.
Well,
I feel like it's mostly about attitude.
If I might just add a quick thing,
then we should change that.
The reason that you see some of them, you still actually see 5 days old and 11, and the reason is because we did a big change by moving to Lerna, and that's one of the examples. Like there's a big code change, so that could delay things, but other than that, we really try to keep it even less than that.
I'm not sure the comparison is a fair comparison. Yeah. I mean, I've opened a PR 17 days ago. I'm checking now. Has been reviewed and hasn't been selected for QA. So should I close it? I mean,
but in that case, no, I'm not saying that this means, so this is not like a blame game or anything. It's not like, oh, dev should, whatever. It's like the process is wrong. There's something wrong in how we do things. Maybe that's the fact that we, so
but
just to clarify.
Working progress PR are not our problem, because, I mean, we do open it, but I think I only open it just to create a build so I can get the artifacts on Jenkins. I don't think anyone uses it as a system, like, like we open a working progress PR when pushing code. I think it's just an artifact of the fact that we want to have builds.
Yeah, that's 100% true. That's the simplest way to get CI built there. That's why I guess most of the PRs that are, because of course, like again, I mean, I've been doing different types of like CI environments, and it's very hard to compare like a web app or anything like written in pure JavaScript that you can Dockerize and make a, I don't know, auto test that run like in 3 minutes. Like, yeah, because I've been working on like a Perl code base that had like 3,000 end-to-end tests, and it was all this whole like cycle of running them for like 5 minutes on my machine. And then you cannot compare it with like a testing end-to-end a mobile app that you can only run on the like some either simulators or real devices that are run in the cloud. So you have to upload it somewhere else, and there are a lot of things that can go wrong. And our tests, like they run like 20 minutes just for end-to-end tests. So it's very different. It's like, it's a very simplistic argument that if it works for some code, that it will definitely work for another. So it's
why do you
tooling sucks for all the mobile things. All the CI tooling really sucks.
So actually, I also feel like it relates to discipline. And if you create a pull request, in my opinion, it's your responsibility to have it reviewed, to make whatever changes, to have it tested and ultimately merged. And yeah, I guess we are lacking a bit on that side.
But I agree that if we relax, because it's not everything that we can do there right now with the current workflow, but I agree that we probably should relax things on manual testing and just, instead of having the skip manual QA label, maybe we should inverse it and just put a label if we think that manual QA is needed for this PR, and for by default just put if the smoke tests pass, just merge them and see what happens. I mean, it still will be an improvement. But I'm not sure that's exactly viable to just close all the PRs that older than 2 weeks and think that's a viable process here.
Could you explain like when you think it would make sense to have a PR that's open for longer than 2 weeks, say?
Well, when we were trying to release one version for 4 weeks, for instance, and we had to release like at least 2 hot fixes along the way. For different cases, so it was like 0 QA resources for almost like 2 and something weeks. So yeah, some of the PRs definitely will stay longer.
Yeah, that's what I'm curious about. For instance, you said you compared with Embark. I don't know what the QA process looks like for Embark. You know, if this is also an impediment for them, because for us, at least during these last 2 weeks, there was a shortage of QA resources for a lot of PRs.
Maybe QA has some, I don't know, who's here? Is Anna here? Or someone?
Anna is not here, or I can speak.
Okay.
So basically, yeah, we've been focused on release for last couple of weeks, like 2 weeks. For sure, and that's why we have that queue. And first, it's lack of QA resource and complexity of our application. Like when you have iOS, Android, desktop, and several platforms for desktop, right? You need to make sure that APR is not breaking anything of it. The biggest problem, I think, here is the complexity of the whole product, whole set of things that needs to be tested. Also, yes, of course, we can skip manual testing for some PRs if they changes a little, but we should wait for tests to run at least like for 58 tests, sanity tests, because we had like bad experience with reverting several PRs during these 2 weeks, and just keep calm and wait for tests to pass.
Yeah, one more issue is that we also have our tests are essentially only on Android. So if you break something specific to iOS or specific to desktop, and we'll just go with like only, looking at manual PRs, looking at automatic tests, then we'll probably lose those changes. Like, yeah, we also built like HPR touches usually like 5 platforms, which is, well, also not a very simple thing. I agree with Anton. So, but well, we can improve for sure. But it just it's again, it's a very simple point of view to think that we'll be just on the same way of like any like web app or like even Web3 app or something like this. We will never be with the same speed, unfortunately.
But I feel like that's not really giving Embark credit, because it's not, sure, it has all these platforms and so on, but I mean, it sounds a bit like there's nothing to learn, which I kind of disagree with. I mean, that seems like, I don't know, it doesn't seem like is it something we can learn from how they work? Is it something we can change? And if so, what would that be? For example, in terms of the QA process, or how we block things and so on, or related to flags. I don't know. Is Goran here maybe?
I'd like to just add maybe one counterpoint to I think what Igor just said, is that when you see dApps that are developed quickly, I don't think it's because of the tooling, it's in spite of the tooling. The tooling right now for dApp development is still very raw. It's very, it's definitely not at the level of like more traditional development. So when you see dApps being developed quickly, I think that's in spite of the tooling, not because of it.
I mean, it depends on what you call the tooling. Maybe we have a tooling like for iOS and Android to run tests, but if this tooling like fails 20% of the time for the reason because, again, platform vendors didn't make a good enough tooling, they might put a check mark that they have this or that, but trust me, the tooling there is just, if you compare, like, of course, if you look, like the simplest example on what to test is any kind of cloud service, and I don't see like any point why there shouldn't be like good end-to-end test coverage that runs very quickly, and the tooling there and super mature and things like that. But like for mobile, I wouldn't say that it's like it's kind of, I mean, it's a very rare case when you actually have a good CI process for mobile apps in general. So the point that we have like end-to-end tests that don't fail all the time is already a huge accomplishment for our team, because I haven't seen this like in quite a few companies. Like I know, yeah, well, we can tell that Facebook have them, like, and Facebook don't have like one automation engineer. They have like probably 100 times more, or maybe a little bit more. So of course, I mean, we can just hire more people or just focus more on automation, and it will help. But it's like, yeah, it's totally different. And also the tools that I use for automation are not the same stack that we use for development. So it's like it adds more languages and frameworks to our like mix. It's like we don't have enough. But sure, we'll probably do.
All right. So 2 questions. So from what you guys said, the reason for the PRs is, one is to actually trigger the CI and get to artifact and so on, and the other reason that they stay longer sometimes is because it's waiting for a release, so it cannot be merged because whatever is in the main branch needs to be released first.
No, not right. No? Not right. Okay. The right thing is that each PR is being tested manually, and if all the manual QAs are busy testing the release, and we have 3 QAs, just to point out at one automation, right? So it's like we just have 4 people there. And if everyone is testing the release, again, 5 platforms to make sure that it works, then there is no one to test these PRs. It's not like we don't have a release branch that's, we don't have a problem of merging something into the develop or master while release is happening. It won't affect it. But we don't have human resources to test in our current flow, and we don't have, probably the biggest thing there is that we don't have any smoke testing on platforms other than Android, because otherwise, if we would have, it would be much easier to just test everything. Like automatically to make sure that app at least doesn't crash on launch other platforms after this.
Okay, so on that regard, because when Oscar asked what would be what is can you think of a reason for PR to stay open in 2 weeks, and the releases was specifically said releases and hot fixes and so on, that a release set has been trying to go out for 2-3 weeks. That's why I thought, what was this referring to then?
No, but that was referring that for almost 3 weeks there was 0 QAs available to test PR.
Okay, I got it. Okay.
Yeah, so it's just people.
In that case, I mean, this is obviously entirely to the QAs, but I mean, can the PRs be just like a smoke test and that particular functionality, and then, or is it already like that actually?
I mean, we have this for Android. It's available for Android, but like for other platforms, I guess it's not. It wasn't done just yet. Again, we started doing something for iOS, but there was this restructure happened just in the middle of this, and I think that we just ran some first test, and then just the person who was doing this was laid off, so there was no one to continue.
So how can we have manual QA be less of a bottleneck without adding additional resources? Is there anything we can do in terms of changing how we do things?
Many things. We can, for example, one thing is that we can move from a model where we, instead of testing each PR separately, some of them might still need manual QA, of course. We test nightlies, for example.
That's what we kind of decided before when we introduced automated tests. That's why it was such a big push to having them be 100% passing, because that would be the sort of first test. So that was the reason. So I agree with you.
That's
the question is, why are we not doing that? So then the question to QA is, why are we not doing that?
Okay, first of all, we don't have capacity to cover each scenario which is added by a development team in end-to-end tests. For example, when we add adding block user, I have 3 pairs in queue to be reworked in order to pass like the whole set of tests to reflect actual new behavior introduced by the pairs, and I just don't have any time to cover that feature. And these blank spaces might be covered manually. But like we are planning to cover those tests in future, but the future never comes because more and more PRs are coming. The same for iOS. We've started iOS, we've been working on it, and in future we are going to add iOS support, but we also need to add battery consumption support, we need to add network consumption support, etc., performance tests, and it is never going to be done because of getting more and more new PRs. We just don't have enough capacity on the end-to-end automation side to cover everything with that flows.
So
we don't have to cover everything.
I got a question. Sorry, go on. I thought it was over the point.
No, sorry. No, I mean, we don't have to cover everything. I mean, this is also why you have feature flags, because if you introduce like a whole new flow and it turns out then when you're testing nightlies that it's not ideal, whatever, you can turn it off quite easily, right? If you do gradual changes and you don't just change things all the time, then to me, I don't know, maybe it's naive, but it sounds a bit like an excuse that we need more resources to make this work. I have a hard time buying it. I don't know. Sorry, what do you want to say?
Well, because it's kind of like a question. I mean, I had previous experience working in a large project that essentially, if there was bugs, there would be big consequences. Basically, there's like money on the line and so on, and it could be a big issue. What happened at that particular type of workplace was very kind of like a blame game type of workplace, if you know what I mean. And as a result, the testers were too much. The QA was excessive, basically. I'm talking about if we change the color of a button, they would still do like the whole testing, because there was a distrust with the developers, and because then management would blame them essentially if there was like a bug, and then they would blame the developers and so on. So that type of thing. So to attempt to reduce this, I try to break the software more into different pieces and introduce acceptance testing and this kind of thing, just to basically increase the confidence and the trust between the QA and the developers. And so my question is, it's a bit of an awkward question, is there this sort of blame game here? Like if there's a bug, if a release goes out and there's a bug, is there like a blame game that causes the QA to be a bit more, I don't know, somehow excessive than it should be? Or that's not an issue at all?
No, I don't think so, but Anton maybe knows. But...
No, there is no blame game, and we are not doing regression testing for APR. All regression testing is done by automated tests. We are testing only the feature introduced by the APR and possible errors which might be affected, and we are not spending like 5 hours by retesting each possible flow in order to pass testing for the PR, right? We are doing regression testing only for releases and automated regression testing for each nightly. Like it's much more extended set of tests than running against PR, but there is no like overwhelm QA actions against each.
Yeah, so as well, just to add on that, like on a good day, if your PR goes to, like your PR gets reviewed in half an hour, just the time to basically ping the developers. And then if it goes straight to the QA, an hour and is in, just time, it takes, on a good day, it just takes very little. It's just like when, they pile up sometimes, especially during releases.
Maybe the problem is with the releases then, and not with the PRs themselves. Because if they work normally, like on a normal days, then we should probably rethink about. So it shouldn't be this all hands on deck release testing. Maybe it should be just longer. We should expect release testing to be much longer. But then for people to keep looking at PRs. Because usually, it's also a bit weird because sometimes these releases, they have this, why they work hands on deck? Because first time there was this Infura issue that they communicated super poorly. And it turns out that it was very, like we had to upgrade our project IDs essentially like very quickly within a day. But then it turns out it wasn't necessary. But yeah, that was weird. And the second time there was some crasher, if I remember correctly, that we found out internally, and then we had to fix it before it went to any public channels. So it was also like it was our quickest release. It was like 6 hours between finding a bug and pushing the release button. Like it was like super quick, I think, for a mobile app. And we were trying to release at the same time another release that's supposed to go with some changes for East Denver as well. So it was a little bit of perfect storm last week, or last 2 weeks. So maybe we shouldn't just think about that. Maybe we should think about releases a little bit more then. And if we test on the nightlist, for instance, then no one should install nightlist for desktop. Because unless they are tested, like if we stop testing PRs, or at least no one should install them and think that, it crashes, it's bad or something like this, because we don't have auto test for desktop just yet. So it's a little bit hard circle to square, but yeah.
One suggestion, because we've been talking about this for quite a while, maybe if someone who hasn't spoken about this topic has something they want to add, and then I think we can go on for a long time with this. But yeah, like anyone who hasn't spoken that wants to say something about this topic.
So I just wanted to add one small thing is we focus a lot on testing in QA, but also realistically we lose a lot of time during the reviews, and we need more people doing reviews. And once you create as a developer a pull request, it's not done. It's just the beginning. So you have to be on top of things and talk to people and push things.
Yeah.
By the way, also maybe something. Am I muted?
No, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I was thinking something that might help also is to limit the number of requests for review to 3 or 4 every time, and like so that it's clear to everyone that when you're asked for a review, you really need to do it. Otherwise, the PR is going to be stalled because yeah, often there is PR with a lot of reviewers, but only 2 are needed to actually pass. So maybe we just need 2 or 3 reviews always, rather than 6, 7, and yeah.
I agree. Anyone else?
Can we turn this into a discuss post just so like we can keep this conversation going? Because if anyone can present any more ideas on how to fix it.
Anyone who feels particularly strongly about this has a specific view of how they would want to change things or what the specific problem is that wants to do this?
I feel quite strongly that we should relax manual QA, and we should move to a system as discussed, testing either nightly or maybe features in batch, or essentially give more responsibility to developers to push code without bugs, so that the responsibility is on them to make sure that the code is up to standard to be merged, rather than just throwing the PR QA essentially.
So should we write a discuss post with just and list all the problems we see and all the possibilities, and then just probably come up with some conclusions, some ideas about how to fix it, which one to choose?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree. And it would be particularly interesting if someone discuss who wants to argue against that viewpoint, because I would agree that does make sense to do things, testing things in nightly, especially if you isolate the features so you can turn them off and so on. Anyone else hasn't spoken? All right, cool.
I mean, yeah. Just a question. Is it possible to pass arguments to all the platform binaries to essentially switch flags on and on without having to rebuild the entire thing?
Yes, to some extent. To some platforms.
Runtime flags, yeah.
Yeah, well, we can always do them like in settings if we just need to be taken care of. Because it's still some code enclosure that just reads this into some kind of constants, but then you just still read them somewhere in the code. Probably you can change them. Maybe with restarting the app, it should be possible.
I think we did that for some things. You can just have some. You just force restart the app.
So they are not like C++ macros or C macros when you don't compile some part of code. No, everything.
There might be some. I don't know if we still have those flags, but we used to have some flags that were a bit gnarly. But I guess most of them aren't. I don't know. Someone probably knows better.
Zero flags.
Okay. Cool. Are we happy with that, the state of that topic, and then take it up on discuss and as well as next call? Right. Awesome. I guess we had also around acceptance criteria and design review. I don't know if that's under the general banner of better PRs. Do we want to touch on that to go to the next one? because it's slightly different. So I don't know if someone wants to add something on that. Hester, maybe?
Sorry, can you come again, Oscar?
Just about design review, acceptance criteria and design review and PRs. We've talked about PRs a lot, but maybe if you want to mention it briefly so people are aware of what that refers to.
Yeah, so I'm not originally a person who put it on the agenda, but my thoughts are just in general, when anything impacts the UI, to add one of the designers as a reviewer, just so that they can check whether the implementation fits with the original designs. That would be all I have to say about it.
I think there was, exactly that. I think there's a slight addition to that in the sense that I'm not sure if in Figma we can do responsive layouts or not, and if that would be useful for developers if that's the case. Because my understanding is there's minor design tweaks that might be able to be resolved because they're not entirely pixel perfect in a real world application. I may have that miscommunication wrong though.
Yeah, I don't think it that automatically happens in Figma, but I mean, obviously it's worthwhile for the designers to check on the responsiveness, so they can probably create a view for the different devices or layouts. That's definitely something that needs to be done. I think, yeah, key is if the designer is added as a reviewer, it's a communication thing. They'll get a ping so that they can actually check when there are deviations or when something might be different from the original design.
Do we have any specific dev or designer on this call that had some issues or felt like there was some friction in the process between PR and design review that wants to speak up?
I've just been observing a lot of back and forth on PRs where the design doesn't match quite exactly with the Figma designs, and it seems to be taking a good amount of time for the designers just double checking things. And some of it seems easy to fix, but yeah, I'm not quite sure what the friction is.
Is there a specific PR you were thinking of? Maybe that would help if someone is on the call.
No, it's more general. There's been at least 3 or 4 lately where there's just long comments from Mache. It's things that have been imprecise.
I definitely really hope that the Figma workshop helped in that as well, because hopefully it makes a bit more clear where to find the specifications. I know Eric already did a lot of good work in implementing components, and Andre as well. I do know the designers try to stick to the components that are already there, and they try and limit introducing new components. So I'm hoping, let's say, the imbalance between implementation and design will also phase out at some point because of the use of components.
But if there are no developers or designers who feel like this is a problem right now, then it's probably not a problem.
Another potential issue here is, we just spent a lot of time discussing QA, sort of contributing to longer PR times. So adding design reviews to this, that we should be mindful that also could add more time to these things.
I guess one thing that I sat in on the Figma workshop, but one thing that it's like a recurring theme is there is this that I got also from that workshop, because I thought there seems to be this continuous recurring theme of this one disconnect between designers and developers, which is the components for the way designers lay them out in Figma is different from the way developers implement them. And so really to developers, it seems like Figma is almost just really like pictures that they then have to eyeball to come up with responsive designs in the application. And I don't know, to me, it's almost like puzzling that there doesn't exist a solution out there, because this is like, status can't be the only place where, I know it's not the only place where this is an issue. And like, there can't just be a solution out there that allows designers to lay things out using responsive formatting so developers can plug that in. It just seems like such a big need. I can't imagine it doesn't exist out there.
Well, there is a huge discussion in the UX community about learning HTML. And should the designer actually use HTML to do that? So regarding like what I see, but I've seen these things for mobile before, and it's like there used to be this course composer that works quite well if your platform is iOS. For Android, I guess your best bet is the Google's responsive toolkit for material design toolkit for like HTML, essentially, for the web pages. But yeah, I think this question is very pressing right now. But yeah, maybe I'm just already outdated on all of this.
Well, the thing is, Figma, if you look at the layouts, they do lay it out already using like CSS. It's like laid out using like fixed style CSS, right? Like the exact number of pixels, which if you change the screen, it might look bad on a different type of viewport. And it's just, I don't know why Figma doesn't just let you lay things out using like Flexbox or Grid or something like that, so that it always maintains those proportions regardless of the viewport that it's displayed on.
Is that definitely not possible in Figma, or percentages at least?
Yeah, I think there should be a specification in DPs should be possible rather than pixels.
Do we have any designers on the call? It would be useful if.
Yeah.
Maybe not. We don't.
Think so.
Okay. All right.
Well, we can follow up offline.
Yeah, we can
another line of thought that's probably worth exploring is maybe how we can reduce the barrier between code and design. So, for example, many moons ago, when Andre created the fiddle, the Andre designer got really excited because Airbnb's design house was working on this basically automatic code generation. I realize this is out of bounds of our capacity at the moment, but it's definitely worth thinking about and keeping in mind.
I mean, one of the goals of this component-based design was to simplify this process without like having the code generation, because if you have like, I don't know, 20 standard components, that then they can be reused in both designs and code. That should be much simplify things. That's why we or Andre had the idea that to standardize our designs, to sort of reduce them to like a very small subset of all the components that are reused all over the place.
Forgive me, I'm actually, how far along are we in that process? Is largely the UI component based now?
I don't know if it's component based yet, but new features that we are implementing, and I think this Eric and Roman and the others, they are just trying to also like either tweak or create those components that are in these Figma documents. They are usually on the top if you look at the Figma layouts, and you scroll all the way to the top above the the screens. They're usually components and their states and things like this. Not that many of them, but I don't know how many were implemented. I know that the bottom sheet was implemented by Roman for the Wi-Fi or for the cellular sync options, but then the others I wasn't tracking this that much.
Okay, so it sounds like it'll just naturally quote unquote improve over time.
Well, that's what we thought. That's the only, like, we won't have any time specifically to just implement those, or at least they would look like a bit weird on the roadmap to just spend time to just refactor components. So we thought that the most viable idea would be to just, whenever there is a new feature that requires some components, they should be implemented, and then the next feature reused and things like that.
Yep, makes sense. Thanks.
But we need some way to synchronize on which component have been implemented already, because I've seen that list items have been implemented twice already. Not necessarily the same aspects of it, but there is some overlap.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Maybe we should just invite Andrei, the designer, and just talk about it on the next core dev call to just have this discussion and see what's already implemented, what's not.
Oh, yeah. Or we can do a component-specific call, quite short, where all the people involved join, so we discuss what has been done and how we could reunite the efforts.
Yeah, that would be nice. So yeah, we can create a separate call about what's the progress on this and who's doing what.
I can set something up.
Thank you.
All right, I'm unmuted. Okay, cool. Anything else on that one, or should we move on? Cool. So protocol discussion and Q&A and suggestions and so on. So the context of this is that we gave a brief presentation at Town Hall, but there might not have been enough time to sort of have a discussion about things and coming with thoughts and questions and so on. So this is just a space where people, they have some thoughts. Feel free to share them now. Or questions or anything.
There's a recent message, I think this morning, from Fatima at the workshop that says she's going to have a draft of a summary, like it's like a summary article of the whole workshop relatively soon. So we'll kind of make that available to everyone to see what happened there, if they're still kind of not up to date on things.
All right, cool. Yeah, okay. So we don't, there's nothing specific then to talk about right now. Eric, you had some suggestion about push notification navigation. Is that something you want to talk about?
Actually, it's about notifications and about navigation. It's not the two together. So, but it's again, it's more. It wasn't necessary for this call. It was just that I need to talk a bit with Pedro to figure out what we can do with notifications, especially in the case where you block a contact that was in your contacts and to whom you send your FCM token. So you want to be able to block this person, maybe change your token or something. And the other one was the navigation. Yeah, and it's the same. Maybe I just next time, because first I need to look at it myself to see how to do navigation for some screens where the origin is different, like the profile, depending on whether you come from the chat or from the profile screen, user profile screen. Yeah, so I don't have much to say for this call.
We talked briefly about the push navigation flow on the core backlog call, I think.
Yep.
It's it's a bit complex to write, because logically what you need functions to register it, because it's tied to a device and not to a person per se. So really, to do properly, you need to have logic to register and deregister devices, and then that should probably be triggered when you block someone, and also when you log out, and all these kinds of things. In a traditional architecture, that would require a central server, and previous proposals was based on sort of this all-in-one mail server, which might not be the right abstraction. So I think it requires quite a bit of thought to make this in sort of some decentralized fashion. It's not the simplest problem to do properly, I think. I know, Pedro, do you have another?
Regarding blocked contacts, we can ignore them at the recipient device. So right now we have complete latitude over what we display in terms of push notifications. So if we receive a push notification and we look up in the database and we see that it's a blocked contact, we can decide to just let it fall and not show anything.
Yeah, that's what I did already, but I think the issue is when the database is locked and then you get a notification, and when you log in, you have nothing and you don't know why.
Yeah.
How does that work on iOS? If the process is suspended, how is there full control? I mean, it's awesome if that's the case. I just don't understand how that
doesn't.
If the database is locked,
right now it doesn't. Yeah. So yeah, iOS doesn't have support for, at least in the React Native Firebase documentation, it says iOS doesn't have support for waking up the app and doing that processing. So what they recommend is to, once you start up the app, then you process the push notifications and you show them to the user.
Yeah, but it's, well, I mean, I was trying to take a look on the next iteration that will work on iOS. So there is a possibility, but it should be rewritten in native, because obviously the reason why they can't wake up the app, because, well, they can wake up the app, but it will be like for 5 seconds, and it's not enough time to spawn up the JavaScript engine and load our Clojure script there and do anything useful there. And so this just, for iOS, it just should be native, because then you can theoretically open a database or something. But I think that the list of blocked users, like the blocked keys, we can just store them, well, in whatever shared preferences or whatever, without, why do we need to encrypt them even? Or something like this.
Yeah, especially since those are already anonymized. So we could just store the anonymized keys.
Yeah, and then if they are stored not in the Realm database and somewhere in a simple place like shared properties that easy to read from the native code, then you can just do whatever Eric suggested, and we just ignore the notifications, or what you suggest, we ignore it on client side, and then that should be simple enough.
Would that also handle the case if you have 2 accounts on the same device?
Yeah, we should also do something to store something which account was signed in the last one, if it wasn't signed out. So if the app was killed but the account wasn't signed out, we should store, well, something that will help us to filter messages. It shouldn't be like just public key in plain text. It might be like a hash of hash of hash of hash of plain of the public key, right? So it might work still, or hash of hash of hash of hash of last 8 symbols of last 8 bytes of the public key. We just need something to compare with one string that we received, which is to whom, to which public key this was addressed. So it should be also, but I guess it's already solved on the current implementation. It just doesn't work in background on iOS, right? That's the problem.
Didn't understand the question. Sorry.
No, I mean, if you have 2 accounts and you signed in an account A, but the push notification comes for the account B.
It won't show.
Already. Right.
Initially, when I implemented the pull request, it was showing for any account that you had on the device, but the decision was made to only show for the last active.
So it's already implemented, just doesn't work on iOS in background. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So in that case, we don't actually need any kind of registration or flow unless we want to switch out Firebase, which we probably want to do at some point, but it's not.
It's not even Firebase related. It's more related to what we sent inside the push notification. So it doesn't matter what exactly sent it.
What I mean is if you are on F-Droid or something and you want to use something else, then wouldn't you need a different token to be reached? And then you would have to communicate that to your contacts?
Oh, yeah, that's true. But as soon as we add additional support of something, yes, it will still follow
but it's
the
not,
same
it's not needed right now. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I think regarding what you're saying, being able not to use Firebase, the first step would be to not have to have Google notification on your device to run status. I think it's still the case.
Yeah, it is. Dustin said this in Brussels.
So that
for F-Droid, yeah.
That would be a more urgent case. And I like the solution. It seems like the simplest one to just maintain the list of banned hashes and outside of the DB so that you can filter the notification beforehand. I think it looks simple enough so that we can reasonably implement it in a short amount of time.
I agree. It seems like a nice solution. All right, cool. Second, next one. This is Jared's thread on key management and WISP decoupling. I guess, do you want to add something to it? I think this is, if there are any thoughts on this, things that might have been missed or general talk, general thoughts on this problem.
I have a question. So I might not have read all the background material. So I understand the need of separating the wallet keys so that the wallet keys is separate from the chat ID. I totally get it. In the post, it was mentioned, and that was, to my understanding, was the first time, and I'm not sure, maybe I missed some conversation. That also, for example, like you have a different key for each chat, which is interesting. And, they can explain how to propagate and so on and so forth. I was wondering, okay, so first, what's the problem that we're trying to solve with having different IDs, with the different WISP IDs in the chat? And then another, which is more of a comment, is this is kind of, and as I understand, is to partially sort of like reveal your identity. So you have power over who you reveal your identity to, which is good. But this is a more general problem that you notice in status that, okay, so we have all these identities and so on and so forth, and I don't reveal it to people that are not in context. But then again, if I'm in a chat, everyone calls me Andrea and refers to me with Andrea, which is a bit of a problem. I mean, it's understandable that we don't have mentions, and so with mention you can sort of like alleviate that problem to some extent. But I feel that if that is the reason, then we need to solve that problem a bit first, or something like that. Yeah.
So those are great questions and great points. The reason for separating out the keys per context, I think it makes, in the general case, it makes a lot of sense, because if you start thinking about these different contexts as their own particular silos, whether it's a wallet, whether it's a chat or a dApp, you might as well have that generic mechanism there anyway. But the real reason I was addressing that in the current post is because there had been a lot of thought and even UI flows to basically reveal an individual identity to a chat. So you could have different identities, but I think it was done through your profile, your settings or something like this, and it would pop up before you entered a public chat. So I was basically trying to mitigate a lot of that UI flow while still achieving the underlying goal of whatever it was. I don't actually understand the necessary reasons, and I agree with you that there is even that sort of more social aspect of it where someone might just mention you in passing, and if you reply to that, then a person can glean that the identity is you regardless. I'm not sure if that's something we can solve barring some kind of censorship. But in any case, I do think that like having the ability to automatically join a public chat and selectively reveal yourself is probably a mechanism worth having, even if this social aspect is still problematic. Because it's not going to be every case that you enter a chat where all your friends are in it, right? Like you could enter a darknet market chat, for example, and you would want to have some guarantee that you enter and converse in that's not tied back to your main identity.
No, I understand. Makes sense. Yeah, I just no, interesting. I'd be interested in the UX point of view because you mentioned that there was some problem, some work done before, so that would be interesting. Thank you.
I mean, so basically, what I was putting out is basically an aggregate of everyone else's thoughts, with just some slight tweaks to how to think about certain things. The main one was, instead of thinking about key pairs as they're in a logical distinction, more just think about them in terms of their security policies. So, for example, when we've been talking about Whisper decoupling, we've been talking about separating a wallet from the Whisper key, which is what we currently have at the moment, and that's definitely a noble goal. But there were some paths of thought in where we've created backwards incompatibilities, where it's like, okay, you would not, because it was a Whisper key, we are not treating it like a wallet. Therefore, if somebody had sent money to that, then it would not be to a Whisper key. Then it would not be able to be retrieved. So there's been this idea of like a hot wallet versus a cold wallet. It's been around since Bitcoin days. But essentially, the idea is that if a private key is in memory, then it's basically a hot wallet, or if it's unlocked in some form. I mean, you could have it unlocked on disk if you're feeling crazy. Whereas a cold wallet or a cold storage would be sort of a physically separated key pair, and then or air gapped in some way, and you would sign transactions and you'd move it over by QR code or by some other means. In Status, like so by extension, like we can use those policies in Status, but there's this sort of intermediary stage where you can have sort of warm wallets, which are still going to be signed relatively easy, but the hot wallets in Status are purely in memory, and so they're all derived off what is currently the Whisper key, right? And the reason we do that is because you don't want to be signing every message that you send in a chat manually. So, but at the same time, we want to still be able to access these key pairs if they do hold a balance in any token, whether it's ETH or ERC20s. So that's basically the reasoning for separating key pairs into hot, warm, and cold. Status doesn't actually manage any cold key pairs, but it's definitely worth having the ability to receive or create a QR code or request onto cold addresses. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Then it's more about derivations, how you derive keys from those. It's pretty simple. You just do you use the private key and you do some deterministic thing, and then you can derive off the public key. So you create a hardened derivation of that original child. I am of the position that we should continue to have the existing derivation of whatever. I got it wrong in the post, but I think Andreas had corrected me. We should keep that as is for now, but then like every sort of subsequent chat that you join will be under a new one. We can do a transitionary period where the existing public key is still happy to directly converse, but then we can switch that off after a certain amount of releases and a certain amount of fanfare and telling of our user base that that's the case. And we can still receive messages on that public key, but we can also, we'll send them out to older clients and it'll just look like a new identity and a random response there. So this is probably better for a sort of async discussion, but I just wanted to make everybody aware that, you know, like we're thinking about this stuff and certainly would love more feedback. And it's important because key pairs are fundamental to what we're doing and they're going to impact many things within the application. So it's definitely worth thinking about. I also made some other suggestions for other things in the wallets. And we could also probably even play around with, since we changed the way that we did our recovery to make us more compatible with other applications, then we should continue doing that work to make the derivations we do compatible with other applications. So we should be able to support different derivations. I mean, every other application has a slightly different structure, and we should be able to support that in recovery and ideally do it automatically. Anyway, most of that's in the posts. Certainly a lot more coherent. I'm currently eating my dinner, so I do apologize if I'm all over the place. Yeah.
Cool. Just a random thought or question. Would it make sense to have this sort of, because if you can imagine that you have it very tied to trust intelligence as well. So if you meet someone, a close friend, then you would see their identity in multiple sort of contexts, but someone who's just like a friend, a contact in a certain context would just be that for that specific sort of child key. And then when you, for example, mention them, it would just render differently, but it would be a UI concern where you would see the sort of privilege, I suppose, like where the highest up the chain that you have established trust, which might be different for different people and different contexts. Maybe that's implicit, but yeah.
Yeah, I
you
think
can totally do that.
I think Jan worked on notification on the mentions before, and that was the idea that you just add, it's just code, and then whoever, you can see the name if you have it in context. You don't see the name if you don't have it in context.
Cool, because I mean, I think it would be pretty awesome if you could have the same account and you could use the same status account, and then if you were also in a darknet market, you would not know it if you were just normally added, but maybe someone else was also in this darknet market, they would know that it was the same person, potentially. I don't know.
Yeah, that works as long as people are disciplined enough to use the app. Or basically it's not up to you. That's the problem. It's up to the other person. But again, as Gerard mentioned, that might not be a problem.
I think if we made like ats just work really well, then people will naturally start using it. And I imagine the more proficient you get with the application, the more likely you are going to use it. Which might not be so bad, because if you are a new user to status, when you first start out, you're probably not going to have that much value, and you probably don't have much exposure to the network either. And there's things that we can do on a sociological level where we create this sort of culture or more of these memes to like, if we end up doing like welcome parties in onboarding, like you could basically say, hey, these are some pro tips that we've learned. And you can get them to sort of pass that on. So while we can certainly take the technology to a certain level, we can continue writing the human software, so to speak.
Awesome. I guess anything else on this topic someone wants to say?
I have one super small topic. that I just wanted to ask for opinion. So we know that status doesn't work on public Wi-Fi's, and that's because ports are blocked. So I have already a PR, and we have an infrastructure done to essentially put all Whisper traffic through the typical HTTPS 443. Is there any reason why we shouldn't do that?
Can it be an option?
Well, we'll have both ports, but yeah, all our Whisper nodes and mail servers and boot nodes, they all reply on both ports. So, but right now this PR is super simplistic. It just replaces ports with 443. But we don't have anything else on these servers, of course. And Discovery, if it finds something on the port that's not 443, it's obvious we'll add it. Still, there is no limits if it's accessible.
One point with Discovery, I'm not sure if you can use low ports on Discovery protocol. It might just, not pass the node which has lower port set. Has it been tested?
Well, it works. It sends
okay.
messages and receives mail server stuff, but it's in testing right now. But I tested it on a few devices and I blocked ports on my local firewall, and it looks like it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I just would confirm whether it's Discovery version 5 that provides those nodes, or it's just our Rendezvous Discovery protocol. Because
I mean, some of them are from our fleet config, so just
yeah. So it's, they're definitely got to be from fleet config. Just I would just confirm that. That's one thing, but yeah, that's cool. That's cool info.
Awesome. Any other announcements?
I've been working on that self-update thing on the weekends, and I decided to turn it into a shelling points game. So that's kind of cool. I'll probably, I don't know when I'll announce it, maybe in a couple of weeks. But the idea is that you basically commit a hash of, everyone commits a hash of what they think is the latest release when we're cutting a new release. And then once everyone's committed and staked a certain amount of S&T towards it, then we all do a reveal, and everyone's kind of rewarded or penalized depending on who has the majority votes and who committed and revealed the fastest. Meaning whoever who pushes the release out fastest would probably profit. So yeah, it's a little coordination game that should be kind of fun to play. And it also incentivizes getting lots of signatures on releases.
Good stuff. All right. Anything else? Cool. So yeah, thanks so much for joining the call. If you have some thoughts on ways we can improve it, just add it in status core devs. Cool. Thanks everyone. See you in 2 weeks. Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.